Let me give you some advice that I wish I knew when I was starting out with painting. So this is some of my art from 3 years ago when I was still figuring out how to paint, and I really wanted to paint faces. I wanted to learn to paint good faces. And this is some of my recent artwork, which I'm going to show you how I got to this point in only 3 years, and how it's actually more simple to improve when you only focus on the most important fundamentals. So you might have heard of the 80-20 rule, which is something like 80% of the results you get are from 20% of the actions you do. So this is what you're going to see me here telling you to get rid of some things that are probably making your process a lot more slower. And one of those things that I consider is making your process slower, which might be a surprise to a lot of people, is color. I personally think color is overrated. And if you're a beginner and you are getting started with all the boring art fundamentals and stuff, you will be better off getting rid of color altogether. Adding color into your painting is just going to make it a lot more difficult, and it's going to add some extra steps to the whole process, which is going to take away a lot of the focus from the most important stuff. And also, color is a very intuitive and very easy. I think it's the easiest fundamental to learn, so you can really do it later on. It's not really essential that you do it right now. And I feel like it really takes away a lot of the focus from some of the most important fundamentals. And that leads me to my second point, which is value. But since this is a more specific and detailed kind of video, kind of guide, I'm going to tell you the only two exercises that I recommend for every beginner, which are very simple exercises. These are not complicated at all. Anyone can do it. But these are essential that you do them if you want to improve, and will literally make your process like 10 times faster. And I'm telling you this because I didn't do these exercises when I was starting out, and I regret it absolutely. And it made my process a lot slower. So please, I hope you can take my word for this. I hope you don't think you are above doing these exercises. And if you're doing them already, there's a chance you are. But if you don't, please start doing these exercises. And so the first exercise that I want you to do, and again, I don't want you to think you are above this exercise just because it's easy, because I do these exercises myself, and I do them when I need to kind of practice or reframe my mindset when it comes to painting. And the first exercise, which, as I said, is a value study, is painting a sphere in 3D form, of course. Painting a sphere is the most basic and easy exercise you can do. It's literally like doing a push-up. Because doing a push-up is not very hard. Like, pretty much anyone can do a push-up, and only doing push-ups is enough for your upper body to grow and develop muscle. But anyways, doing a sphere is a very useful exercise because it teaches you value, form, shapes, and blending, which is all you need. I promise you, this is everything you need if you want to paint anything. So if you want to be a good painter, you only need to do those fundamentals. You only need to train those skills. And all of that is covered when you paint a sphere in 3D form using value. I'm leaving here a little video so you can kind of know what I'm talking about if you haven't done it before. And so this is pretty much the way you do it. And the second exercise, which is also a value exercise, is doing 2 value studies or value distillations, whatever you want to call it, which is pretty much painting only using 2 values. And this might be a little bit of a challenge. This is a little bit more of a tricky exercise or a more advanced exercise, but without any doubt, this is the best exercise you can do for painting. This is a little bit harder than painting the sphere, but it's very incredibly useful. Honestly, to paint anything you want, this is the exercise you want to practice. This is the thing you want to focus on. Because guess what? Good painting comes from being able to simplify everything. Simplify the values, simplify the shapes. And when you're doing this type of studies, you are reinforcing all of those fundamentals, but you're doing it in a way that's very digestible. Because if you can't do a painting yet, if you are like I was 3 years ago and you're trying to paint a face, but it doesn't really work out, then you have to simplify the whole thing. Because when you simplify it, now you know from what point to move forward. So it's not confusing anymore. Like, it will still be a little bit challenging, but it will not be as confusing because you will have a clear path of where to go and from what point to start scaling up the challenge. So learn these 2 exercises. If you're a beginner, I promise you this is a game changer. This is going to make your entire journey at least 10 times faster if you take this to heart, if you take this seriously. The next thing that you need to know is how to make a proper sketch. Because if you're going to make a sketch for a painting, like a kind of an underpainting, you can't sketch it the same way like you would sketch normally. So, for example, when you're drawing, and let's say you're drawing a face, you're drawing all the little features, all the little tiny details. But when it comes to painting, we don't really do it the same way. I've tried it that way. I've seen a lot of people who do it that way, and it might work for them. But for me, it didn't really work out because I would try to make it like kind of like a pencil sketch in Photoshop, and then I would try to paint over it in all the different type of way possible. But in the end, nothing really worked for me. But you also want to make a sketch though to make everything a lot more simple. So the way I personally do it, you can copy the way I do it, or you can kind of copy the line method, which is doing like pretty much the same way a traditional painter would sketch a painting, which is doing like an underpainting kind of thing. So a lot of traditional painters would sketch the painting with the same brush, with like a dark orange tone, and they would make like an underpainting, like you saw me doing at the beginning of the video. But you don't really see me focusing too much on the details. I'm not really painting every detail or focusing on tiny little strokes and detailing all the features. But what I'm doing is rather focusing on big shapes and big lines. So I know where everything goes. I focus on making the proportions look very accurate, which is something that you want and is very important. I'm going to talk about it later. And it's a very simple and non-intimidating way to start a painting. Because when I was still figuring out what to do, I was like, holy shit, there's so many ways to start a painting with this little random sketch, or starting with shapes without even sketching. Like, how do you even do this, man? How do people paint like this? And it literally took me years to find the best and easiest way to sketch, and also the most effective. Because if you're focusing too much, if you're getting lost in all the little details when you're sketching, because in my case, doing a conventional sketch would consume a lot of energy for some reason. It was kind of draining, and I didn't really know why. I feel like spending an entire hour just on making the sketch, so polishing everything, making everything look super detailed and super pretty, it just felt like a chore to me. It didn't feel like something enjoyable because I wanted to make a painting. I didn't want to draw. But personally, this is the way I found that is more suitable for my process and for the way I approach painting, and it's the way that is for me the easiest. So once again, if you're having trouble with proportions, or if you're having trouble making the initial sketch, you might as well start the painting like this, like I just told you. The next thing I want you to keep in mind whenever you're painting anything is more of a mindset thing. It's not really like a fundamental or a very practical thing you can do. Do you remember what I was talking about earlier about drawing spheres? Well, there's a reason why that exercise is so powerful. And that is because when you're painting, let's say you're painting a face, you're painting spheres. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but when you're painting the forehead, for example, let's say you're painting a face and you're painting like each individual feature. So you're painting the nose, you're painting the forehead. For example, let's say when you're painting the nose is very simple for me to paint. It's very easy for me to paint. Guess why? Because a nose is pretty much just like a little sphere. When you approach the entire painting as if you were just painting different sized spheres, everything suddenly becomes a lot easier. We can say the arm is just a sphere, or maybe not a sphere, it would be like a cylinder. But if you know how to paint a fucking sphere, you know how to paint a cylinder. So it's suddenly not that difficult anymore. Or the same thing with the forehead. The forehead is just another sphere, and the same thing with the cheeks. The same thing when you're painting the chin or the lips, everything, and the eyes, everything is just a little sphere or a big sphere or a cylinder, whatever. Point is that when you're able to kind of see all of these simple shapes in the actual painting, everything just becomes a lot less intimidating. So to sum up this entire mindset, just imagine everything is a sphere. So when you're painting a face, start painting the forehead and treat the forehead just like as if you were painting a sphere. This is just why I was telling you to practice this exercise. So be sure to keep this in mind the next time you're painting. Okay, so the next thing is to copy as many artists as you can. So I don't want to extend myself a lot in this point, but the TLDR is just get as much inspiration as you can, study different artists, do studies of different people, and be comfortable with internalizing, and be comfortable with putting yourself in the shoes of the artist. Because when you do that, you're going to understand certain stylistic decisions or, stuff like that that you wouldn't otherwise thought about. So study a lot of artists, study a lot of different people, and don't be afraid of, I don't know, feeling dirty or feeling like you're stealing their art. Of course, if you're going to make a study of an artist, don't pass it as your own. If you're going to post it on Instagram, sometimes I do that. If you're going to post a study of an artist, just say that it was a study and maybe tag the artist on the Instagram. Or you can just write on the canvas, study after this artist, and now you're not feeling like you're stealing the art or something. The next point is about proportions, and it's the same thing I told you a while ago about the making the sketch and everything. And I'm just going to give you a couple of tips that I do that it might be helpful for you. So whenever you're painting, don't be afraid of using the Liquify tool. The Liquify tool is a very helpful tool if you fuck up your proportions. So whenever you mess up, don't be afraid of changing things around. Just fix the proportions as much as you feel necessary. And the second thing, which probably should have been the first one, but whenever you're starting a painting, like I just told you, whenever you're sketching, focus on the relationships of the canvas if you want to get good proportions. So focus on the empty space between the edge of the canvas and the head, for example, and try to calculate, okay, roughly how much space there is between this part and this other part, or this shape and this other shape, and try to focus on using the shapes as like a guideline for your proportions. You can use the corner of the canvas, for example, to measure and compare it to the photo reference. So it's a very useful thing that I do, and it's a very good habit especially if you're struggling with proportions. I really recommend you doing that. Also, if you got to this far in the video, you're probably very serious about art and you actually want to improve and get better. I have a paid community where you can join, and I will help you to have an art transformation just like I did. So I go into greater detail and I do my best to simplify all the fundamentals and techniques that are going to make you improve a lot faster. And I'm going to actually get you the results that you want. And also the point of the community is that you can interact with me so I can personally coach you and make sure you are improving and give you like live advice. It's not the same when you are there with the person and I'm directly giving you feedback on whatever the thing is that you want to improve at. And you also have a community of artists that are also growing alongside you. So if you're interested, you can check it out. It's in the first link in the description. And the last thing I want to talk about is to tell you, after all of the years of experience I have making art, what fundamentals are a waste of time when you're starting out and are not actually giving you that much improvement in comparison to the other fundamentals or the other techniques. So I'm going to tell you what fundamentals are very important and which one are not, so you don't waste your time learning useless stuff. This might be a little bit controversial. I'm just going to start with the least important or not so important. And those are color, as I said in the first point, perspective, composition, and anatomy. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, but those things are very important to learn. And you're telling me not to study them. And they are. And I'm just telling you to not do those things, at least in the beginning. Then after you're a little bit more advanced and you have a little bit more experience, you can start working on those fundamentals. And the most important, the ones I consider the most important and that I regret not paying too much attention when I was first starting out, are value. That is the most important, literally the most important, and even the only fundamental that's worth investing a lot of time into. Then you have form, you have shapes, and you have blending, which is the least important one. Like, I was still debating whether it should be in the most important category or the non-important category. But let's just say it's like somewhere in the middle, because it's really good to know how to blend, but it's not really that necessary. So let's just say once again, we have value, form, and shapes. This is the only things you should focus on when you're a beginner. You shouldn't really focus too much on the other little things, because when you start fragmenting your brain so much, you're going to get a lot more overwhelmed. You're not going to be as consistent and you'll want to quit art because it's too difficult. I really hope this video was useful for you and that you hopefully learned something and you apply some of the things I showed you in this video, because I truly believe this is genuinely useful. If you're interested in the one-to-one coaching in the Discord community, you can find it in the top link in the description. And yep, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.